pun intended for anyone. All right. Thanks so much, Becky.
Sure.
And of course, you can see Becky's show tonight on CNBC. And some of the biggest tax loopholes in this country are those used by corporations. The left-wing think tank Demos found that corporate taxes as a percent of total U.S. tax receipts fell from just over 27% in 1955 to 9% last year. Should corporations take on more of the burden? David Callahan is senior fellow at Demos. He ran the numbers. Also with us, Phillip Swagel, former assistant secretary for economic policy under Hank Paulson, professor at the University of Maryland. Okay, good to have both of you with us. We appreciate it. So, David, let's start with you. What were the key findings in your report? Some of these are pretty stunning in terms of what corporations now pay compared to what individuals now pay.
Yes, there's been a big shift from taxing corporations to taxing individuals. In the 1950s, as your graph mentioned, about a quarter of all federal revenue came from corporate taxes. Now it's under 10%. And also, as a percentage of GDP, back in the 50s, we were corporations is about 4% of GDP going for those corporate taxes. Today, it's under 2%. And you often hear, well, the U.S. corporate tax rates are higher here than abroad. In fact, corporations pay a smaller percentage of their overall revenue than companies abroad. So I think that there really needs to be a redressing of that imbalance.
Phillip Swagel, let me ask you before we get into the details here, conceptually, how you feel about this issue of corporations taking on more of the burden, because after all, there's been many who have tried to say Americans should be rooting for big companies because those are the companies that invest in your community and hire you or hire your neighbors, so we're all in this together. Then you see numbers like David's, and it's pretty hard to see we're all in this together.
Yeah, no, I guess I have two thoughts. One is to keep in mind that ultimately they're individuals, they're people who own corporations. And so over the time period David has in mind, the share of taxes paid by the wealthiest Americans has gone up. So the overall tax code, including individual and corporate, has become much more progressive. So, even though it looks like the corporates has gone down, overall the share of people paying at the top has gone up. And the second is kind of what you said, that the corporate tax code, corporate tax is a really anti-jobs tax and is a really ineffective, inefficient way of raising revenue. And so I would kind of want to move away from that and raise the revenue we need in a different way.
So let's talk about that, because you both agree that we have way too many loopholes. And any individual probably feels that way, too. It's too complicated to even know what the heck you're doing. David Callahan, you think that we should get rid of loopholes, but I think, when you say your organization is left-wing, some people might be surprised that you are in favor of lowering the corporate tax rate, too.
Well, I think we're very much where we were back in the 1980s when there was all this huge profusion of tax loopholes for corporations. And in the tax reform of 1986, those loopholes were closed, and Ronald Reagan was all for that. And that reform lowered the tax rate for corporations, but also increased overall revenues from corporate income tax by a third. So I think we should really be looking at a similar kind of reform today, and that is what's been suggested by the Deficit Commission that President Obama appointed.
Phillip Swagel, are you in favor of that? If we lower the corporate tax rate, knowing that corporations will end up paying more, is that something A, we should do, and B, Washington would even have the guts to do, given the powerful corporate lobbying forces that would come out against that?
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of what David said. The hard part is the details. What is a loophole? And I think the biggest one that people look at is the treatment of foreign source income. When an American company makes money overseas, I don't see that as a loophole. In some sense, I think the U.S. is on the wrong side of that, and I suspect people on the other side of the debate would say, oh, that's the biggest loophole, we got to close that. So I agree with what he said, but I suspect on the details we might have different views.
I'm sure you both do, but I mean, David, let's take this GE example that's gotten so much publicity, and then the fake press release the other day. I know they're saying it's not real cash, but a few $1 billion in credits to the biggest company in the country. Is that something we should be concerned about, or is that something that you think could be fair under any system?
Well, GE made $14 billion last year. A lot of that profit was made overseas, and they're not going to pay profit on that. This is the biggest loophole, because what corporations do is they have all these different subsidiaries they set up. They shift their income over to those subsidiaries. They don't pay profit on that. Those subsidiaries are in tax havens. Goldman Sachs, a good example. It has 29 different foreign subsidiaries subsidiaries made $2 billion in 2008 and paid $14 million in taxes. This is a shell game. Corporations abuse this. It's been estimated that $60 billion is lost every year because of abuses of those foreign subsidiaries through income shifting and transfer pricing.
Okay.
That is definitely something we got to get a handle on.
All right, well, we'll have to talk about this one again. Obviously, they agree on getting rid of loopholes, but don't agree on what's a loophole. All I have to say to both of you is that we got rid of all the loopholes, and you lost all those jobs for the lawyers and the accountants and the consultants, and I don't know who else. We might have a huge jobs crisis. Just something to think about. All right. Thanks to both. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, the death of the PC has not been greatly exaggerated.